So, after these short introductions into various fields in our first lesson, I thought it might be a good idea to talk about the important fields for our language journey. And since we're on this topic anyway, I might as well explain my LAT, which stands for Language Acquisition Technique. At least a little bit. Again, I did write a small paper, non-academic, about the LAT, which can be found in the description as well as in the pinned comment. The LAT is not yet fully finished, but the basic idea is already in the paper, including examples for verbal illustrations. But before we can start, and yeah, you will hear or read this phrase very often from me, I would like to quickly explain the main goal of this channel. As you may have figured out by now, my channel is a bit different from the others, and that is because I do not only want to help you achieving your language goals, but I also want to acquire a large amount of languages myself as well as teaching you about linguistics. More specifically, about those linguistic aspects that are relevant for this channel. That means that every linguistic video will have some direct relevance to the languages that are either currently or in the future on this channel. That means when we reach topics like language history, aka diachronic linguistics, it will be about the languages on this channel. For example, our second lesson Old Norse, as well as English of course, and that is because this is a well-studied language and has a lot of importance for this channel. In the end, if you keep watching my stuff, you will have a very deep understanding of languages in general, as well as specific languages, in terms of being able to understand and use them. I will from time to time upload premium stuff on Patreon, such as the Futhark reading and writing exercises that I'm currently working on. And this even has some extra additional information. But also free PDFs, like the two about the accentuation rules of the Attic dialect and Classical Latin. You will not only be able to understand languages as a concept, but you will also be able to see behind the languages, so to speak, and understand how they are built and what to look out for when you want to study or just explore the languages. Now, with that out of the way, let me give you a short overview of the important topics for the LAT. Those will be the linguistic topics I will be focusing on this channel. I need to set myself boundaries, because otherwise I would talk about each topic and would not get to the point at all. All of the fields are interesting, and I could read and talk about each of those topics for hours. And I do have a concrete goal for this channel after all anyway. So I hope that makes this channel unique enough to stand out. So, for the LAT, we have quite a few fields, and the following fields are just the linguistic parts of this. So, first, morphology, then phonology, syntax, grammar. Yet, grammar is not really a field of linguistics like the others, but it is quite important to mention here as a separate field. You will see in a bit why. And then, language acquisition, more specifically second, third and later. And dialectology or variationist linguistics, at least to some extent. And then, historical or diachronic linguistics, since we're also including old languages, and I think for acquiring fantasy languages, it also has some interesting use cases. And then, comparative or genealogical linguistics, because comparison is a very important aspect. Typology, anthropological linguistics, paleography or orthography, corpus linguistics, and sociolinguistics for politeness stuff. Now, Those are the main fields for my LAT, and as you can see, we do have quite a lot of different fields. Technically, there are even more fields such as pedagogy, history, mythology, anthropology, and so on. But they are not directly language related, yet very important for overall context and understanding, and other behind the scene kind of stuff. Other than that, only evolutionary linguistics is missing in this list, but that has nothing to do with my LAT. Yet, it is quite interesting for this channel because I'm very curious. And technically, semantics and pragmatics would also be part of the LAT, but it would be too much for the early stages of the LAT, as I would need native speakers for each of the languages. And to be honest, for some of those languages, it is simply impossible. For example, ancient or fantasy languages. Which is why it is not included here. It would give sense and meaning, so to speak, yet this is also being given by other fields as well. The base idea of having those two fields would have been when to use what kinds of phrase, for example, sayings or implications and so on. By the way, listening all of this, I realize that we have much more fields than I thought. And yes, I would be able to create fantasy languages on the level of Tolkien. I know how to do this, how to use linguistic features and characteristics to build civilizations, history, and even folklore around self-created fantasy languages. Translating linguistic features into something much more, and knowing a thing or two about mythologies, which may or may not is a hint to my main channel. I could even use that knowledge as well, but I can also create works like Lingua Latina per se illustrata as well, because I know how to teach stuff as well. Maybe one day someone needs those kind of skills somewhere. Maybe you need a conlang. So, just saying, I know how to do that stuff. Sorry, I got distracted again. See, that's why I have my boundaries. Now, with all of this out of the way, for this lesson, we will not go in depth for each of the fields, which are important for the LAT, or this channel in general. This we will do in the upcoming lessons, one lesson for each of the important fields, including evolutionary linguistics, of course. To be more precise, the next couple of lessons actually will be about those fields, one by one, where we will dive deeper and explain those fields in general and give examples, so that you will understand each of the fields and thus have a better understanding of the LAT as well as languages in general. And obviously a good understanding of linguistics. Now, let us look at the different fields just a bit closer from the point of view of the LAT, so that we have something to build upon. And yes, this may take a while. Important before we begin, and yes, I did say it again, it would be useful to have read my LAT paper, so that you understand what I'm even mumbling about. Again, beginning with morphology, the study of internal structure of words. For the LAT, it is foundational. You see, the LAT treats vocabulary not as a flat list of items, but as networks of transformational rules and predictable affixations. Morphology supplies the raw patterns those rules must encode, knowing which morphemes are productive, which alternate in specific phonological or syntactic environments, and which carry grammatical versus lexical meaning. This allows the LAT to algorithmically generate plausible cognates, create morphologically coherent word families, and prioritize teachable chunks that recur across registers. Now, since this is rather abstract, let me give you a more practical sense. have a look at the following words: read, reader, reading, readable, unreadable. As you can see, we have one stem word, read, and can create 4 more words out of this, simply by using affixations, which would be prefix and suffix, and something called circumfix. By identifying the rule behind this, in our case looking at ing, able, as well as something able, we can apply these to other words as well, and expanding our vocabulary already without really doing anything. Next, we must understand what each of those suffixes, prefixes, or circumfixes actually mean. For example, nominalization of a verb, ing, or changing a verb to a person who does this verb, for example, read to reader, and so on. If we then also include flexion, which would be conjugation and declination, and if you have read my paper about the Latin conjugation, you will know how much further we can spin this, because we can do this also backwards and identifying smaller parts of a word. For example, the 5 properties of each verb. And thus, we have done a massive step without doing much at all. And it does make the acquisition of conjugation and declination, a language has it, much easier. You do not need to learn hundreds of forms and learn anything by heart. Admittedly, there are cases where learning by heart is much better, yet never required. Just a sincere suggestion. But instead, look at a small set of rules, which would be, in this case, affixations, and understand what it means. And this is where 4D grammar mapping, as well as abstract grammar or grammar blueprint, are already waiting for us to lend us a hand or two. They know what we are looking for, and they will help us. Next we have phonology. Now, phonology focuses on the abstract sound system of a language and is not the same as phonetics, despite sounding very similar. You see, phonemes, allophones, stress, pitch, syllable structure, and prosodic patterns, that is the kind of stuff phonology is dealing with. I mean, we do need to know something about how to make a sound in a given language, or at the very least, be consistent in doing so, because for some languages on this channel, we do not have enough information about that at all. For example, Middle Egyptian, but we can at least be consistent, so that the acquisition is much smoother, and it feels like acquisition. You see, phonology is indispensable. It tells you which contours are meaningful, which co-occurrences are banned by phonotetics, which means sounds that are part of the language and sounds that are prohibited, and which alternations reflect morpho-phonological processes, for example, long versus short vowels in Latin or other languages. Next we have syntax, aka sentence structure. This is how phrases combine, argument structure, word order, subordination, and clause types. Now, LIT's grammar blueprint or abstract grammar and template system live in the territory of syntax. Reusable sentence slots, valency frames, transformations, and permutation rules are all syntactic products. Syntax makes LIT able to teach constructional patterns. This is how to build a question, a causative structure, or a relative clause, rather than forcing to memorize sentences without structural understanding. Yet, here we must be careful, because, as it is the case very often, oversimplification can cause issues, such as getting stuck, meaning not understanding more complex stuff or getting the wrong lessons out of this, meaning wrong syntax, for example, or generally misunderstanding a rule. And here, similar to morphology, this will be fundamental for exercises. For example, the rearrange constituents, which would be words or phrases that always have to be together and can't be separated, even when changing the word order in a sentence. And next we have grammar as engineering and pedagogy. You see, grammar here is the pedagogical and prescriptive application of descriptive findings. The set of rules, meta-rules, and explanatory frameworks you actually learn. Why not a discrete academic subfield? Grammar is where theory becomes curriculum. It organizes morphology, phonology, syntax, and even semantics and pragmatics into a teachable or learnable architecture, which would be the grammar blueprint or abstract grammar part of my LAT. You see, in the LAT, grammar acts as the orchestration layer. It sets scopings, what counts as a core versus peripheral rule, designs progression maps for stages of mastery, and encodes remediation strategies when learners, aka you, errors reveal systematic misunderstandings. Yet, a risk is turning grammar into rigid recipes that ignore communication. That would be nonsense. The remedy is contextualized, usage-based presentation grounded in corpus examples and learner diagnostics. So, here, I kinda have to find a balance, and it is one of the reasons why certain fields you may not expect in language acquisition or in this list. Next we have language acquisition, to be more precise, second, third and later. And, well, I dare to say, and that one might be obvious. It is where neuro and cognitive linguistics as well as psycholinguistics are coming in. And pedagogy. I do need to be able to make it understandable for you after all. And for that, I need to know how languages are working in the brain. What works as a method and what is just a waste of time, energy and motivation. Speaking of motivation, I also need to keep you motivated. This includes having a good structure for the acquisition. There is a lot behind the scenes stuff going on. It is more than just knowing or learning any given language. For every language I'm learning or will be learning, I need to have a curriculum of some sort, because I do want to teach all of those languages as well. And teaching requires an even deeper understanding of stuff, and the pedagogical aspect is also there. A lot of my jokes are deliberate bad jokes, and so is my casual demeanor, which, to be honest, luckily is my natural character anyway. Using technical terms as well as being casual, with a joke here and there, as well as having a bit of sarcasm every now and then, is more important than you might think. And there are a lot of nuances, and as a storyteller, but it's also part of me. Again, hint to my main channel, I know how to play around with those kind of things, changing the tone, using more poetic phrasing, but also telling a joke or two, captivates you and thus keeping you motivated. And this is just for language teaching. When I'm talking about mythology, history, or the like, I often end up going full on Homer or medieval fantasy bartender for some reason. You see, there is quite a lot behind all of this, not just being good at language learning. Same goes for everything else that I'm teaching. I do have to adapt to the topic and have to change my attitude, demeanor, wording, phrasing, etc. Yet, again, luckily, that is all very natural to me. So, I'm lucky enough to have those characteristics. And thus, I can change and adapt with ease It is also one of the reasons why I'm working so much with metaphors and stories. Try to put all of these in an AI prompt. I'm also aiming at a very casual and light-hearted atmosphere, so that you can relax but not getting the feeling of having to take an exam at the end. You should feel joy and relaxation. And for blood's sake, don't be shy when you want to know something. That is my job to answer you. And that is the reason why I have that kind of background music, a tavern playlist. There never should be any pressure at any given time. On my main channel, where I'm mostly talking about mythologies, and that is beyond simple story repetition by the way, I'm full on in storyteller mode, unless I'm explaining or teaching something. So, this is one of the reasons why I can't use AI for my scripts, because I have to put all of these nuances, and they have to be natural, so that they are most relaxing. And then we have dialectology or variationist linguistics. Here, I'm mostly referring to the differences between formal and informal speech, but also occasionally different dialects, which again goes hand in hand with phonology. And then, historical or diachronic linguistics. Here, this traces change over time, sound shifts, morphological erosion, grammaticalization. Well, there are a lot of ancient old languages on my list, and I do like language history quite a bit. So, it does help with a lot of languages as well. For example, if we are looking at Latin and see where it has its impact, even in modern English. Again, I already wrote about this very topic in my LAT. And then we have comparative and genealogical linguistics. Now, comparative linguistics establishes genetic relationships and regular correspondences. And LAT's core technique of triangulation, actually it would be multiangulation, because there are more than 3 languages involved. Transformation rules across languages benefits directly. Comparative methods provide the systematic correspondences that we need to generate probable cognates and to hypothesis transformation rules that learners, aka you, can generalize. Well, basically, it all comes down to you know one language, thus you already know a lot about a related language. You probably just don't know that you know. And again, in the paper I wrote about this very topic, I have already explained this with a couple of examples that will immediately boost your language acquisition by giving you literally thousands of new words. It is one of the fundamental aspects, because this is the very reason why we have a very strong boost early on. A lot of vocabulary can be acquired, as well as understanding grammar, which becomes so much easier because you're already familiarized with it. Then we have typology. This classifies languages according to structural features such as word order, morphological type, alignment systems, and so on. The LAT must be typologically informed so that its templates and heuristics adapt to different architectures. A strategy that works for subject-verb-object languages, isolating languages, may fail for ergative or polysynthetic systems. Basically, different language groups have different rules. Knowing what language has what kind of feature, thus falls under what kind of group, helps us tremendously by acquiring this particular language, which again goes hand in hand with the previous part about comparative and genealogical linguistics. At this point, you hopefully start to understand and start to see that those fields are very closely interconnected. Then something you may not have expected here, anthropological linguistics. This situates language and culture, ritual language, genre, worldview, Latin lexical fields, and the socio-cultural value of forms. You see, the LAT is aiming for deep cultural competence, and thus must incorporate this perspective, which metaphors are culturally essential, what registers are tied to ritual roles. And to be honest, as a mythologist, rituals are always an interesting topic anyway, as well as how politeness intersects with social hierarchy. Next we have paleography or orthography. Paleography as well as orthography concern the, writing systems and historical graphemic forms. And writing systems in general are a huge part of my language studies, and knowing how they evolved is not only very interesting, but also part of the journey, as I actually have various other languages on my list where they used a predecessor of specific writing systems. Furthermore, it does help to understand how they are structured, so that we have an easy time acquiring them. Next we have corpus linguistics. Here would also NLP, which stands for Natural Language Processing, as well as computational linguistics, because of large language model, or in short LLM, be important. But it is not part of this channel. Yet, I do need to deep dive and study AI, so that I can sandbox as well as train AI based on my own LAT. This would be an AI purely trained on my own data and my own parameters. To be honest, the current AI are not really suitable for such a very specific task with so much nuances. Because natural language is broader, complex. But this is for something much later. Yet I do have plans for this already, because of course I have. And finally, sociolinguistics for politeness and register. You see, sociolinguistics explains how language indexes identity, power, and politeness strategies across contexts. For a pedagogy that explicitly teaches politeness, which the LAT hopefully does, the right forms for royal audience, a merchant, or an intimate friend. Sociolinguistic insight is essential. It shows you which morphological or lexical options encode respect, difference, or solidarity, and how pragmatic markers change across social distance. A good example here would be the Japanese system of keigo. And lastly, the conclusion. Why does that matters for the LAT? Taken together, these fields form a web that makes LAT robust, scalable, and hopefully ethically sound. And this is something many language learning methods are leaving out entirely. Morphology and phonology supply the building blocks, syntax and grammar give the scaffolding, typology and comparative work generalize across families, historical and paleographic work bind the modern to the ancient, corpus methods provide empirical grounding, sociolinguistics, anthropological linguistics, and dialectology ensure, hopefully, cultural and situational sensitivity. And acquisition science tells you the order, and pedagogy most likely to succeed. aka, it tells me what kind of methods are working and what are just a waste of time, motivation, and energy. Well, that was a lot, but we are done.